Welcome back. The assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk is the latest jarring example of political violence in this country, which has risen to levels that we have not seen in generations. In the last 15 years, we have witnessed acts of violence aimed at political figures on both sides of the aisle, some of them fatal, targeting figures at virtually all levels of government, state lawmakers, governors, Congress, and the president himself. These are just a few examples and by no means a comprehensive list, but we have compiled it to illustrate the alarming frequency, especially as of late, of these kinds of incidents. It is just so hard to look at that list. Joining me now to explore how we got here is an expert on this subject, Cynthia Miller-Idriss, director of the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab at American University. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. If you would just start off by putting this moment into perspective, you look at that list and it's frankly breathtaking. It doesn't seem like we have experienced a moment like this, quite frankly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but since the 1960s.
You're right. We haven't experienced a moment like this since the 1960s into the 1970s. We're now at the levels of political violence that we saw at that time. We started to see the rise in assassinations, political assassinations happening also overseas in the UK, in Germany, and elsewhere over the last several years. And really, it's as we just heard, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when at this point, because so much has been unleashed and the genie is really kind of out of the bottle. But the data is very clear. We are at levels of political and hate-fueled violence that we haven't seen since the 1970s for sure.
And would you describe the assassination of Charlie Kirk, this 31-year-old dad who was a conservative activist? Does this feel like a watershed moment, like something has shifted in the discussion around political violence?
First of all, I have to condemn the violence. It's horrific. No matter what your opinions are in terms of whether you like what someone says or not, there is no cause for somebody to get shot ever, and there's no cause for political violence like that. And so I think that's the first thing that has to be said unequivocally across the spectrum, and we have seen that, thankfully, in the last 24 hours among elected officials and among leaders. We've seen a lot of condemnation. We're not seeing that same kind of condemnation universally happen on social media, which is really troubling, and it reminds me a little bit of that assassination of the United Healthcare executive, where you saw some celebrations even, and I think that's where part of what we have to see now is a dialing back of the rhetoric. This is, or it could be, a watershed moment. It may be, when we look back, a moment where we say that's where things started to change. I hope it's a moment where we say, let's start investing in prevention again, because that's the kind of thing that, at this point, we can't securitize our way out of this. It's too expensive, it's too impossible, and it means being perfect every time. But there are ways to prevent this when you see red flags and warning signs that indicate something might need to be off-ramped.
And when you're talking about the rhetoric itself, because you're describing what you've seen online, it is horrific to think anyone could celebrate the assassination of another human life. How can we begin to rein that in? Because that is the backdrop, this hatred, this vitriol that we see online. That's the backdrop to all of this.
Absolutely. I mean, there's sort of two major things that we have to see happen. One, we have to see everybody across the political spectrum and within their identity-based forms of anger start walking away from the us versus them thinking, this existential threat posed by the other that starts to position violence as an acceptable solution or even a preferable one to any kinds of differences. So once you see people describing the other group as an existential threat, that's a big warning sign and a red flag for somebody starting to move toward thinking, well, it's time to be violent because none of the rest of this has worked. And the second thing is really that second piece that we hear sometimes on college campuses across the spectrum is that there is no political solution anymore. That itself is a call to violence. And so we have to help young people in particular start to see that political solutions can work, but that requires grown-ups and older adults and leaders to demonstrate that political solutions work.
And on the other side of that is this, for example, you referenced the shooting of the healthcare CEO and the fact that the suspected killer there who's been charged, has been lifted up as a folk hero in some circles online. Is that motivating other people potentially to take up these horrific acts of violence?
There's a huge risk of that. We've seen that with white supremacist extremist shooters over the years, where they're actually seeking martyrdom. It's one of the reasons why I never name the actual shooters. I only refer to the incident or the city, because they want that kind of recognition. They want to be seen as heroes. They're sometimes called saints. And I think we're starting to see the potential for the same type of thing to happen with political violence from the left and the right, where attacks are driven also by ego and a desire to show that you're willing to, put your money where your mouth is, so to say, to be violent and stand up for these things that you believe in so strongly. So we really have to help people walk back from that idea that violence is valorized, is desired, is effective, or is acceptable in any way.
Well, it's really critical information on, again, just an incredibly somber day for this nation. Cynthia Miller-Idriss, thank you so much for joining us with your insights. We really appreciate it.